The busiest border crossing between the U.S. and Canada has reopened after demonstrators forced its closure for several days.
On the U.S. Canada border, the Ambassador Bridge, which we've been telling you about connecting the U.S. and Canada, finally reopened overnight after protesters were cleared out over the weekend.
Gordie Howe International Bridge reached a major milestone. The tower cranes were removed, a sign construction is almost over. But a new report suggests the bridge's opening could be delayed by 6 months. Our Veronica Ortega is getting answers.
Night fell over Detroit with a $5 billion question mark hanging in the air. The Gordie Howe International Bridge, once hailed as the crown jewel of North American trade, suddenly looked less like a triumph and more like a trap. Why? Because one man's ego turned steel and concrete into collateral damage. That man, of course, was Donald Trump. With a single tariff announcement, Trump didn't just target Canada. He shook the very foundation of the alliance that had carried both nations since World War II. What was supposed to symbolize unity between two neighbors now stands as a monument to mistrust, betrayal, and a trade war that spiraled far beyond steel and cars.
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50% the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
But here's the kicker. While Trump raged, Canada quietly rewrote the rules. And the ending to this story is nothing like he expected. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Did Trump just hand Canada the upper hand? The Gordie Howe International Bridge was supposed to be a legacy, not a liability. A $5 billion span stretching across the Detroit River. It was pitched as more than just steel and concrete. It was sold as the beating heart of North American prosperity. Washington promoted it as a gleaming artery of commerce, proof that America's leadership still held the continent together. For Trump's team, the bridge wasn't just infrastructure. It was ideology cast in metal, the physical embodiment of America First dominance. But that vision began to crack the moment a tariff storm gathered over Washington. Instead of becoming a monument to unity, the bridge morphed into a monument to uncertainty. Each beam and bolt now looked less like progress and more like a reminder of how fragile trust had become. Was this massive structure a gateway to shared prosperity? Or a $5 billion tombstone marking the death of seamless trade? Observers on both sides of the border could feel the tension. For decades, bridges symbolized trust, goods, people, and ideas flowing without fear. Now, the Gordie Howe Bridge stood half-built, half-celebrated, and entirely overshadowed by suspicion. The very project designed to lock two economies together suddenly felt like a hostage to politics. And that's when people started asking the unthinkable. Could a single tariff decision unravel the foundation of a bridge that was never supposed to be political? It happened in an instant. 280 characters that detonated decades of integration. In March 2025, Donald Trump fired off a tweet declaring a 25% tariff on all cars and auto parts imported from Canada and Mexico. No warning, no negotiations, no diplomacy, just one line of text that landed like a bomb across North America. Trump wrapped it in his usual rhetoric: national security, protecting American steel, bringing jobs back home. But across the border, Canadians didn't hear patriotism. They heard betrayal. After all, this wasn't China, this wasn't Russia. This was aimed at America's closest ally. For Ottawa, it was less a tax hike and more a declaration of economic war. The effects were immediate and brutal. Supply chains that had taken decades to weave together snapped overnight. Assembly plants in Detroit, Ohio, and Illinois slashed shifts as crucial Canadian components sat stranded at customs. Within hours, billions of dollars in U.S. exports piled up at border crossings, trucks idling in endless lines. The so-called just-in-time manufacturing model, the pride of American industry, suddenly became stuck in line, bleeding billions by the day. And looming over the chaos was the Gordie Howe Bridge, half-built, gleaming in the sun yet hollow in meaning. A $5 billion dream now looked more like a $5 billion mistake, a steel skeleton caught in the crossfire of a trade war. For Canada, the message was crystal clear. If Washington was going to treat them as a threat, then the era of polite diplomacy was over. And while Trump crowed on social media, Canada's strategists quietly began plotting something far more devastating. While Trump basked in the chaos he created, Ottawa moved in silence. Canada's top economic strategist, Mark Carney, wasn't interested in Twitter theatrics. He was interested in survival and in rewriting the rules of the game. Behind closed doors, Carney pitched something radical: the concept of a single Canadian economy. On paper, it sounded like bland policy jargon. In practice, it was a quiet declaration of economic independence. For the first time in decades, Canada was preparing to stop treating North American integration as permanent. The first weapon was unveiled as the Reciprocal Framework Regulation. Unlike traditional retaliations, slow, debated, watered down, this system was automatic. If Washington imposed a tariff, Canada's response would kick in instantly. No votes required. A self-triggering defense mechanism, like an economic missile shield calibrated to strike back in real time. But Carney didn't stop there. Ottawa rolled out a $10 billion emergency fund, nicknamed the Beats Co program. The catch? Any company taking that money had to cut ties with U.S. suppliers, accept the aid, and you pledged to rebuild your supply chain at home or with new partners abroad. The message was ruthless but clear. Canada would support you, but only if you helped cut America out of the picture. Suddenly, companies that had relied on U.S. steel, auto parts, and components for decades were scrambling for alternatives. And as they rewired their operations, the pain began to spread south. What Trump thought would kneecap Canada instead started hollowing out America's own industrial base. And this was just the opening move. Canada hadn't even played its strongest cards yet. The backlash didn't hit Wall Street first. It hit the rusted heart of America, the factories and machine shops that had held on through recessions, global competition, even the pandemic. And this time, it wasn't China or Mexico undercutting them. It was Washington's own policy. In Wayne County, Michigan, a hub of foundries and machine shops that formed the backbone of the auto supply chain, owners started shutting their doors. These were family-run businesses that had survived the 2008 crash, survived outsourcing, and clawed through COVID. But they couldn't survive Trump's tariffs colliding with Carney's retaliation. Within weeks, over a dozen plants were on the brink of extinction. The numbers told the story. Orders from Canadian buyers vanished overnight. Long-time contracts evaporated as Ottawa's Beats Company pledge forced companies to dump U.S. vendors. For these factories, decades of trust meant nothing when survival was on the line. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, Canada's regulators twisted the knife. Shipments heading north now faced melt and cast rules. Bureaucratic paperwork so detailed it bordered on espionage. U.S. exporters had to document not just where products were made, but exactly where every piece of metal had been melted and cast. Missed a detail, and your shipment was turned away at the dock. In effect, Ottawa forced American firms to reveal their industrial DNA. Supply chain secrets that companies had guarded for generations were suddenly sitting on Canadian desks. Factories weren't just losing business, they were losing their leverage, their edge, their lifeblood. Trump promised to bring jobs home, but instead, his tariff war was burning them alive. And while America bled, Canada was already building for the future. While U.S. factories struggled just to keep the lights on, Canada took the crisis and turned it into an opportunity. Ottawa wasn't content to simply retaliate. It began laying the foundation for a new industrial era. The centerpiece was the Green Hydrogen Corridor, a coast-to-coast pipeline network designed to make Canada a global leader in clean energy. It wasn't just another infrastructure plan. It became the largest project in Canadian history, dwarfing anything Washington had on the table. And here's the twist. Every inch of pipe, every steel beam, every bolt was sourced from Canadian mills. Ontario's steel plants, once shadows of their former selves, roared back to life. For the first time in more than a decade, furnaces ran at full capacity. Over 1,000 new jobs sprang up, giving struggling industrial towns a second chance. What Trump framed as an economic attack had, ironically, given Canada the push it needed to rebuild its manufacturing backbone. And unlike Trump's scattershot tariffs, this wasn't reactionary. It was strategic nation-building. Canada wasn't just weathering a storm, it was reshaping its economy for the next century. Meanwhile, across the border, U.S. manufacturers were drowning in paperwork and layoffs, stuck fighting over yesterday's supply chains. America was busy arguing about tariffs, while Canada was already sprinting into the future. And if you think energy and steel were the only battlegrounds, think again. Because soon, even the seafood industry, the humble lobster, would become a weapon in this war. It sounds almost comical, lobsters as weapons in a trade war. But by mid-2025, the Atlantic's crustaceans became symbols of just how far Canada was outmaneuvering the United States. Both countries fished the same waters, hauling the same catch. Yet, when Canada expanded its global trade deals, the battlefield shifted overnight. Ottawa had already signed the CETA deal with Europe and joined the CPTPP pact across the Pacific, giving Canadian exporters tariff-free access to massive markets. The U.S., meanwhile, had walked away from those very agreements, leaving its fishermen fenced in by Trump's isolationist policy. The result? European and Asian buyers who once ordered from Maine turned to Nova Scotia. By late 2025, American lobster exports plunged nearly 40%, while Canada's catch surged into new markets. In cold numbers, Canada exported over $3.2 billion worth of seafood in 2021, compared to less than $500 million for the United States. Same ocean, same product, but vastly different fortunes. For 75 years, the U.S. and Canada thrived on the belief that shared dependence would mean shared prosperity. One leader, one decision, and one tweet shattered that fragile promise. Now, the cracks are visible in factories, fishing boats, and even the traffic numbers on a bridge meant to symbolize unity. So, what do you think? Did Trump's tariffs strengthen America, or did they hand Canada the leverage of a lifetime? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives.